Welcome to my channel. This time I'm trying to build a chessboard out of purpleheart, maple, and mahogany. I start by cutting pieces of purpleheart and maple that are 5.2 centimeters thick. Then I cut the pieces that are 5.2 centimeters thick into 9 millimeters thick slices. When I got 8 9mm thick slices, I cut 3 of the purpleheart and 3 of the maple to exactly 5 centimeters wide, which is the final size of the chessboard squares. I don't cut the 2 pieces that are a little wider to the correct width until I've glued all the pieces together. Time to do the first gluing. I glue together every other purpleheart and maple and place the slightly wider pieces on the outer edges. The first gluing is now complete, and I have scraped off some dried glue. I make a first cut to get a completely even side. To make sure the saw cut is exactly 90 degrees, I use a crosscut sled. Once I know I have an even side that is exactly 90 degrees, I first cut a piece that is slightly wider than the 5 centimeters. I will use this piece at the far end of one side. Then I cut 6 more pieces that are exactly 5 centimeters. I place the new pieces on the bench and rotate every other piece. Through this simple method, I get the squares. Finally, time to glue the board's playing surface. Before I start tightening the clamps, I carefully check that all the pieces are in exactly the right position. I am cutting an MDF board that I will use as a bottom plate for the chessboard. Then I glue the chessboard squares onto the bottom plate. Now I can finally cut the outer squares to the correct width. I cut all 4 sides of the chessboard so that the squares closest to the edges are the same size as the other squares, which means 5 by 5 centimeters. Before I continue, I check that all corners of the chessboard have an angle that is exactly 90 degrees. Now it's time to start with the outer frame of the chessboard. I start by cutting 4 pieces of mahogany to a thickness of 2.8 centimeters. This is the height of the chessboard. Then I continue by cutting the 4 pieces to a width of 4 centimeters. Finally, I cut the frame pieces that will be closest to the playing surface. I have chosen to make this frame from beech. I cut the pieces to a thickness of 3 millimeters. I glue the inner frame around the chessboard. The reason I chose to make a thin inner frame of beech is that I wanted a type of wood closest to the chess squares that doesn't have the same tint as maple and purpleheart. Now it's time to cut a recess in the chessboard that I can attach the outer frame to. I make the recessed groove 1 centimeter wide and 1 centimeter deep. Then I make recesses in the outer frame pieces so that they fit with the grooves in the chessboard. I start by cutting 2 grooves in each frame piece. I make the grooves 0.9 centimeters deep, place them 1 centimeter from the inner edge of each frame piece. I adjust the fence to 0.64 centimeters and cut the pieces on both sides so that I get a flap in the middle that is 1 centimeter wide and 1 centimeter high. Before I assemble the frame pieces, I cut them at a 45-degree angle. Now the outer frame pieces are ready to be glued around the chessboard. Since I'm short on long clamps, I have to glue the outer frame pieces to the chessboard one by one. It works too. It just takes a little longer. Time for some sanding. I start with a fairly coarse paper that has a grit size of 80, continue with grit size 120, and finish with grit size 240. The edges of the chessboard are almost razor sharp, so they need to be chamfered a little. Instead of doing this by hand with sandpaper, I use the smallest router bit. I have to round off the sharp edges. I don't have any tools to make recessed numbers and letters in the frame, so I'm trying to paint these instead. After 15 hours of masking and painting, the numbers and letters look like this. They're not quite perfect, but they're good enough for me. Finally, it's time to apply epoxy. I pour the epoxy directly onto the board and start by varnishing the sides. Once the sides are finished, I continue by spreading the epoxy over the entire top. It is important to ensure that all surfaces are covered properly. That is why I draw the brush over the entire surface several times, and also in a crosswise manner. I discovered that a hair from the brush had come loose and got stuck in the varnish. It's not fun to find a hair in the epoxy after it has already cured. So it's important to be careful and check all painted surfaces several times before leaving the epoxy to cure. You don't actually need heat to remove the air bubbles in this epoxy because it is self-thinning, but I usually use a little heat anyway because the air bubbles disappear faster then. I also varnished the underside of the chessboard and put 4 little feet on it. With feet on the chessboard, it will be a little easier to lift it away. This is what the chessboard looks like when the epoxy coating is finished. For being the first time I built a chessboard, I have to say that it was quite successful anyway.